promoting a confederation model to resolve the conflict. As I say, while it is officially relatively new, the ideas behind it have been developed over more than a decade by various academics and analysts. And I'm sure we'll hear more about this history this evening. Oren Yiftachel, who will be presenting to us this evening, is one of the early founders who developed this framework and is now working to bring it to reality. Professor Yiftachel, is the professor of urban studies and urban planning at Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Beersheba, Israel, where he holds the Lynn and Lloyd Hurst Family Chair in Urban Studies. He has studied and taught at several major universities around the world, including Columbia, the University of Pennsylvania, and University College in London. In addition to his academic career, Professor Yiftachel is also a prominent activist. He has held board positions on a number of social justice organizations in Israel-Palestine, which include ADVA, the Center for Social Equality, and B'Tselem, which is one of the leading human rights organizations, where he is a past chair. And of course, he is one of the founding board members of A Land for All, which he will be presenting to us now. Please join me in welcoming Professor Oren Yiftachel.
Very best if you angle it a bit more and I can stand because there's quite a few people here. I'm very glad that that hall is filled. So thanks very much everybody for coming. It's a hard day. It was a hard night and a hard day for our project of peaceful, just, prosperous world, especially in our corner, but elsewhere as well. Perhaps there's a little comfort of the poor, we say in Hebrew. Nachmat Aniyim, that the US democracy is under threat as much as Israeli democracy. And it's a crisis, it's a global crisis. And basically it's an assault on the world order. You can pin it down to 2016, to 2022, the invasion to Ukraine, to what happened to Gaza. Of course, the Hamas and the Islamic terrorists are also part of this project of destroying the order that actually, as a political geographer and legal geographer, I can say for the last 60, 70 years, we call it the long peace. Think about it. There's Iran-Iraq, there is US invasion of Iraq, which we can talk about because it seems to be reincarnated. And there's no other big wars. And that's a world order that has succeeded to create incredible wealth. There's also quite a lot of poverty and stability around the world. And now it's challenged. And it seems like there's a few sort of flashpoints where the challenges focused, and one of them definitely is Israel-Palestine through Gaza. They see it as an opportunity to demolish what has actually worked quite well for a lot of people, including the Jewish people, that created a state that was recognized by the UN, that created a sort of safe haven for Jews after the Holocaust. But since 2023, or maybe a bit, Israel has become the most dangerous place for Jews, not the safest. So it's something that, even from my perspective as a Jewish Israeli, puts a lot of question mark about the leadership and about what actually is happening. And last night was another big blow, because even if nothing happens, it's usually many of Trump's statements in the past, I don't know, Mexico will build the wall and they pay for it and things like this haven't come through and haven't been implemented, but still they created shockwaves and implications and discourses. And Trump doesn't need to do much to do with Israel, because Israel has a very right-wing fascist government that already evicted 2 million Palestinians. And just now they've come back to northern Gaza. So they have incredible support, even if the United States doesn't do much, because of that speech last night and because of the plan to colonize Gaza. And so this is very, and I decided to start my talk with that. So these are signs, not all that very clear, but the presentation is not all that important. Not only the press conference yesterday with Trump was actually the leader of so-called the free world, was actually advocating openly severe war crimes. You know, when we know about the law, these are severe war crimes. Forced displacement, eviction of people, destruction, flattening, what do you say, developing into a Riviera, all these kind of things. But also Elon Musk, who is now one of the top officials, I mean, that gesture 2 weeks ago, again, is, of course, it echoed very, very strongly in Israel because of what it means. But it is, I think, a threat with all that it symbolizes: fascism, dictatorship, deep rooted racism, and of course, coming from apartheid South Africa. You know, the family history is not so surprising. And part of the trajectories that I, through my research, can trace is that Israel is becoming an apartheid state. So it's very much all these things are connected, and Trump gave it another push. And because, of course, this is a blow to Palestinian right to self-determination, which is internationally recognized, even by the United States, by the way, that supposedly officially is for the two-state solution. But this is a terrible blow for that. Of course, no Palestinians will agree to it. It could create a chain reaction to a regional war. It's even likely. And we just saw it this year happening. So it's a very sad day. I put Jabalia there, bomb shelling, because it's a metaphor, but it's also real, right? Israel has bomb shelled Gaza. You were there in Jabalia in 1988. This is where the Intifada started. I suppose the most successful, the first Intifada is the most successful Palestinian rebellion, which was mostly non-violence, or very, very low level of violence, like blocking roads and throwing stones. And that started there. And this is why Israel has made 3 attacks on Jabalia now, until it totally flattened it now, raised it to the ground. 250,000 people live there. So I think this is also symbolic with the Hail Hitler and with what Trump was saying. Sadly, I'm saying, this is, you know, just to frame it, we are, of course, working against it, and we think our way is the right way to get out of it. But we need to connect to actually what's happening. So I titled my talk, The Political Geography of Israel, From Creeping Apartheid to Peaceful Confederation. I'm just, sorry, I'm not sure that I'm on the right PowerPoint. Just 1 second, because I have 2. And let's just say here we are. We take a timeout. Okay. I noticed by the title, this is another lecture for tomorrow. So Israel, Palestine, apartheid or confederation. So just as an opener about myself, you were already told, raised in Israel on the northern border, born in Haifa, been involved in many initiatives. Also lived for a while in Australia, where I got to know what indigenous popular struggle is, and with some kind of other comparison. And I've been involved in the UN Forum of Indigenous People for many years, and I work also in Israel, Palestine with the Bedouin people, which to some extent helps me to understand from that angle. About Alpha, Land for All, we'll talk in a minute. And framework has to stress that it's by international law. We're not a radical organization. In fact, we're quite conservative. It seems radical compared to what's happening on the ground, but we support international law. We support international convention. We support the right to self-determination for Israeli Jews and for Palestinians. We want to stabilize and have the place prosperous. And we also very much come from the viewpoint that the two nations, the Jews and the Palestinians, are traumatized nations. So some of this behavior, when it's coupled with almost unlimited power, trauma becomes ethnic cleansing. Trauma becomes obliteration. But it comes from very deep insecurity. Of course, the Palestinians and all our partners are now in total shock because disaster after disaster after disaster. So this is where you actually have to think about re-engineering the place with kids' gloves. These are not just two normal nations that have some border dispute. These are two traumatized people that had terrible, terrible histories. This is another reason to be so angry at Trump. I mean, it's just absolutely no understanding of what he's dealing with. This is a little bit of inspiration. I am an amateur poet, and I always looking for inspiration. So already in 1849, Arthur Clarke was writing for a situation like now. I was on the radio yesterday in Israel. I said we're dire straits, but we have to remember there is always a way out. For while the tide waves vainly breaking, still there is no painful inch to gain. Far back through creeks and inlets making, I'm silent flooding in the main. So could be that we're actually creating the main with all hundreds and thousands of people that believe still, and they know, not just believe, that equality, democracy, and peace is far, far preferable to what we're seeing now our leaders are leading us to. So I'll talk briefly about the 7th of October and the war, then a little bit of historical overview, the current creeping apartheid situation that I see as very much framing our society, and then how we offer to get out of it in the latter part. So the 7th of October and the war after it is really a year of grief and rage. I mean, the 7th of October attack was the worst act of terrorism in the history of the conflict, which is 120 years old. It's only the second largest terrorist attack in history after September 11. So think about it for what a shock it was, with almost 1,200 people killed, the vast majority of them civilians, 400 people at a music festival being slaughtered, and all the other crimes, the kibbutzim that were burned, the rot. It was a real shock, and it will be something that have to be dealt with for generations. At the same time, the destruction of Gaza is also unprecedented. It's the worst violence that Israel has applied on Palestinians ever, right? Not in 48, not in 67, not ever, not in 2003, not even close to this kind of destruction of something people estimate now 60,000 people killed, because about 10,000 of them still under the rubble, about 300,000 people injured, mosques, universities, schools, hospitals. It's a war of revenge and destruction. And there's so much pain. These are all people that I knew because I live in the South. In our universities, we lost 88 students. And these are people that are very close on both sides, by the way, because we have a lot of Palestinians living in Israel. So one of my students has had 6 cousins killed, including Issa Suri. And Vivian Silver is a person that I worked a lot with in B'Tselem and in the South. You know that Phil Bibas is still, and he went to kindergarten with my grandson. And he's a Bedouin Samer Talalke that also died. So he was kidnapped and died. And Shlomi and Shachar were people that we knew very, very well that also were killed. So it's very, very personal. So anyhow, as a scholar, I try to take a step back and do an analysis of why it's happening, where it's leading. But you know that that it's very, very close to the bone, so to speak. And then the urban side of Gaza, it's the largest thing about it. It's the largest Palestinian city. It's like New York for the Palestinians. and there's almost nothing left of Gaza. A million people live there, and I think it was the New York Times that said that what you imagine hell is what it is. It is, that's about 3 or 4 months ago. And then the return. So some hopeful signs, very small hopeful signs, but anyhow, the way that Israel allowed people to return, which was the current deal, at least for a few weeks, it seemed like it's calming things down and they maybe can rebuild it. And probably that's what will happen, notwithstanding Trump's recent predictions. And the Israeli hostages, this is Emily Damari also that went to our university, and also the Palestinians that returned to northern Gaza. This one, Faiz, is 86-year-old, and she's the aunt of a colleague of mine, Thabit Abbas, who was one of the founders of the movement. So they were broadcasting it live, walking from the south to the north of Gaza. Of course, there's not much left of the house, just a few pieces of concrete. But anyhow, a return always seems to be some kind of hope. Let's not forget that the war is also in the north. 150,000 Israelis were evicted and about 400,000 Lebanese. Hezbollah sort of semi-joined the war, and so they created another front there, and at the end of it, but plenty of bloodshed. Also, 4,000 Lebanese killed, and many villages destroyed. And all that. So now taking a step back and seeing what's actually happening here. So my analysis as a political geographer, legal geographer, is actually we have three conflicts happening at the same time. And they intertwine, but they cannot be collapsed together. They have different logic, different actors. One of them is a geopolitical one that, in the United States, all too well. And someone said, the empire is back. The empire never disappeared. The empire is there. The United States has 750 military bases around the world. It's controlling so many proxies and so many organizations, but it's making its presence felt. I would say that, of course, the tension with Iran and with Russia and China also, but especially with Iran and Russia, is affecting us a great deal. And I would also remind you Americans that the last invasion to the Middle East ended up terribly. This was an invasion to Iraq. It brought about the rise of Al-Qaeda and Daesh. Sorry, Al-Qaeda was before it. It brought about the rise of Daesh, of ISIS, that created havoc for the people of the Middle East and Syria and Iraq. And there's no achievements for the Americans except toppling Saddam Hussein and placing him with other leaders that's now connected to Iran. In fact, it was a defeat for US interests. So if they're going to invade Gaza now, why would it turn out differently? In what way? There will be terrorism, there will be, and the previous one before that, the invasion of Lebanon, as you know, that, what was it, 850 Americans got killed by Hezbollah, 1986. So when Trump actually mentioned those ideas, he has to look at recent history, not even our history. But the geopolitics, of course, are important. This is why the US under Biden, which were very critical, the last year of Biden was also a disaster, not stopping Israel and funding Israel and arming Israel, really created this further and further depth of the disaster. And okay, so it's stand there, it has an impact, but I would say that our conflict would also exist without the geopolitical aspect, okay? Because if this is resolved in Israel and Palestine here, the tension between Iran, the United States, Russia, China will continue. It will just move to another arena. So the main issue is the ethno-colonial and the democracy struggle that are inside Israel. So the ethno-colonial is the colonial situation that exists in Gaza and the West Bank, when Israel actually controls another people. It doesn't have any civil rights, doesn't have sovereignty, doesn't have a freedom of movement, doesn't have a political power at all. So this is the colonial situation. And inside Israel, for the last 2 years, there's a big struggle for democracy, because you might have heard, they call it judicial reform, but really it's a change of the regime, where they want to have all the legislature and the judiciary totally subject to the power of the executive. So basically stopping Israel from being a democracy. And this also involves the Arab citizens of Israel. It's not divorced from the struggle of the territory. And the people that want to destroy the democracy in Israel are exactly the same people that want to colonize and annex the West Bank and Gaza. So the two are different aspects of similar conflict, but still, they play the different arenas. So when we looked at these three and we understand them, each one with its own logic, we actually can fathom a little bit what actually happened to bring us to the point that we have now. Now, historically, you can hardly see that, but anyhow, you probably know that our current problems start with the British Empire and the French Empire, because they decided to divide the Middle East to states that actually don't make much sense. Those borders still exist. They, in the Balfour Declaration, that actually gave Palestine to the Jews before the Jews were even there. So, you know, there are very few, I think 6% of the population was Jewish. So they created another element of conflict, and they divided those borders between Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, etc. So they create a lot of tension until today. Just as a background to see that, for example, I'll give you the Holy Land of Israel or Palestine, that the Palestinians and the Jews treat it as sacred, and they're willing to die for it. It wasn't created by Muslims or Jews. It doesn't overlap the history of Muslims or Jews. It was created by the Christians, right? It never existed before, what now we call the land of Israel. It was different. We can go through the details, but nonetheless, it's a very hard fact now that this is the land that we fight over. And think about Palestinians and Israelis actually fight over the very same piece of land, which is quite rare. Usually the struggle is over a region, right? The Kurds want eastern Turkey or northern Iraq. The Catalans want part of Spain, but not the whole of Spain. But in Israel-Palestine, the two peoples feel the whole land is their homeland. And this is one of the foundations why we think a confederation is the only way to work. Because it's very genuine. Okay, so the British and the French did it in the beginning of the 20th century. But now people feel really attached to this land. And this is how we have to work. Now, these are different attempts to partition the land. I won't go through all the details, but all of them failed. So we live in like the fifth failed attempt to partition the land. This is another reason why confederation, where the groups have rights, but they also have freedom of movement in the whole land, is probably the only way forward. And this, I bring this as an example. These are two fridge magnets that I have in my house. And my wife and I went to Jerusalem about 2 years ago to Babel Amud, how do you say it in English? The gate that goes to the north, Damascus Gate maybe. And they have all these souvenirs there. And they're two identical, but one of them said Palestine and the other one says Israel. And the salesman said they're both made in China. But it just shows you, she shows you the mental geography of the people and how they feel belong to the same land. And then all of Israel's publication, official publication, is the whole land. You know, when these Israelis were very up in arms about the demonstrating, saying from the Jordan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's what Israel does. It's just from the Jordan to the sea, Israel will be free. So it's the same map, wrong map, by the way, because the two nations should have a place, but this is what Israel does. And of course, the Palestinians doing all the symbols in all their flags, they look at the whole land, right? Whether it's the PLO, with the Palestinian Authority, or whether it's Hamas. Now, with Hamas, you see that the land is less important because it's Islam that is more important. That's another discussion about the Islamic movement and what's their connection and how they look at the messianic return of Islam, etc. But nonetheless, in Palestine, this is the claim, the whole land. And you could see just last week, this is the release of Agam Berger, one of the hostages. And you know, Hamas staged all these incredibly violent kind of ceremonies. And they keep putting this statue of the whole Palestine there, just in front of the Israeli soldier, right? This picture can actually be analyzed because they cannot hide the total destruction. They don't even try to hide the total destruction that they brought on their own people, right? Israel did it, but the Hamas actually triggered it. But nonetheless, this whole thing shows how it's important to take the whole geography as part of the conflict. And I think this is crux of my argument, is that the long-term strategy of Israel is that to control the whole land from Jordan. See, now Trump made it obvious, but until last night, it was sort of unspoken truth. Netanyahu in the UN a year and a half ago, he put this plan of the new Middle East, and the new Middle East had Israel without any mention of the Palestinians. And this is actually a process that is happening probably for about 30, 35 years. Netanyahu came to power in 1996 for the first time. So, by the way, he was advocate of a two-term limit, and he kept saying two-term limit, and then he forgot about it when he was voted in for the third term. But this, I think, is our problem, our big, big problem, that is a total denial of Palestinian rights. And this book that came called Preventing Palestine showed how in so many arenas, the West in general and the United States in particular have prevented, despite their advocacy of two-state solution, they actually worked all the time, ceaselessly against. And this is 46 times vetoing United Nations Security Council for the establishment of Palestine. The US has vetoed for Israel more times than it vetoed for the US, okay? This is how the colonial machine is working. So Israel has become sort of there's impunity for Israel. That is part of the problem. We're too powerful for our own good, for our own long-term good. I put this slide in, which is quite important. It's looking at it from the other direction. And I would say that if you ask most Israeli Jews, they think Israel is doing quite well. They are a happy majority. Most Israelis have powerful military. 96% of the land is in Jewish hands, which of course most of it is confiscated from Palestinians, but most Jews don't know about it. 60% home ownership, I think that's higher than many parts of the United States. Center of the Jewish world. High tech, very strong with high tech. GDP, $52,000, and Palestinians are $4,000. Look at the gap. So most Israelis think the state is doing quite well. Only that we analyze it and we see that it's actually standing on very, very shaky grounds because it's unstable. It's based on occupation of other people and based on resistance of most of the world. Even the United States official policy is against what Israel is doing. So this is not sustainable. But let's not forget that most Israelis feel the situation is not that bad, despite the war. Now let's look at the history of it, how it actually happened. How much time do we have? 15 more minutes, 20 more minutes?
Yeah, I mean, if you could get into the actual proposal.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, professors, if you give them, you have to give them a limit. I won't bore you with that, but anyhow, some of my books actually go into the history of how the geography, political geography, legal geography has changed. Without going also the details, Israel has established 1,200 settlements in a small land. Think about it, the size of New Jersey, 1,200 settlements, 1,200. So it's a massive settlement project, which involves violence, conquering land, and it involves confiscating the land, involves development, investment, infrastructure, only for Jews. The Palestinians in 1948 shrunk by half. 65% of them became refugees, and the Palestinian geography has remained the same. It hasn't developed at all. No Palestinian or Arab new settlements have been built except about 10 to concentrate Bedouins. So it's not for their own goodwill. So think about that as a trajectory over 80 years of having this situation. The Palestinians feel locked in, enclaved in, mostly for Gaza that was actually under siege, but also elsewhere, feeling very, very confined. And there is huge push in Israel to continue the settlement. just recently there was a huge conference of 11 ministers participated and thousands of people to settle Gaza. This is on the cards, and this is also part of Trump's plan. Of course, when he said there will be jobs, there will be development, there will be a Riviera for the people that will live there. They asked him who is going to live there. He said, well, it's undetermined yet. Okay, these are the people already planning to live there. Jewish, mostly from the settlements. So this is where we are now. This is the plan. This is the map. You see those green enclaves is where the Palestinians live. There's about 7.5 million Palestinians, about 7.5 million Jews. The Jews control about 90% of the land. The Palestinians, half the population, have about 10% of the land. They have no settlement. They don't control the establishment of land, development, immigration. There's no immigration, Palestinian immigration, only Jewish immigration. So this whole thing is on shaky grounds, really. It's governed by domination, and it's governed by fear, and sometimes justified fear because Israel is attacked. But it's not sustainable for the long term for our children and grandchildren, etc. So this is where we come in. Now is land for all. So about So about 20 years ago, well, 1999, yeah, 25 years ago, I started to write about from two states to confederation. Now, in international law, confederation is a different animal to two states. It's a different animal to one state. It is where states come together, they each have sovereignty, but they allocate authorities to a higher level of government. That they do it and they share some of the government willingly. One of the most famous examples is Canada. Canada started as a confederation. Still officially, it's a confederation, right? With Quebec, the French coming together with the English. Later on, they also remember that there is indigenous people, so they put them in as First Nations. But it is definitely a confederation, and Quebec has the right to secede, and it almost exercised it. You know, there was a referendum in the 80s, and there was like 51 to 49. Sweden and Norway were a confederation. Bosnia is a confederation. Bosnia is very relevant because they had a horrible war, 200,000 people killed, worse than ours. And they manage now to have sort of the Serbian people and the Croat and the Bosniaks in separate states and joint government, very thin joint government, but it's to some extent working. Of course, the European Union too. European Union is a confederation. Switzerland is a confederation. So this is where there is one land, when people look at the place and feel attached to one land, but they have different collectivities of political rights. So what we say here is the land cannot be partitioned, but nor can it be united, okay? That's a conundrum we're facing, right? All the partitions have failed. But yet it cannot, a lot of Palestinians now say, well, let it be one state. But Israelis say, no, we cannot have one state because Israel will no longer be Israel, right? And there is no precedent of a state giving itself to someone else. Sometimes states are conquered, but not willingly and joining with another nation and becoming a different state. So this is where, this was the problem with Canada too, yeah, right? With the British conquered the French. So this is where the two-state solution has failed, the classical one that the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak said, we are here and they are there. And they built the huge wall. Anybody seen that? Have you been there? 8 meters, was it 25 feet wall? Hasn't worked, right? One-state solution, again, it's apolitical. No state will give itself up, even though it's a nice idea from a liberal perspective. It has a lot of problem also that the population is not very liberal, but it's a non-starter for 98% of Israelis. So this is why we came up with the idea that we have to find a different formula. And so what we are saying is that land for all, two states, one homeland. This is the subtitle, which actually already indicates what the idea is to keep the geography as it is, because the most traumatic thing, as you can see now, the most traumatic thing that creates multi-generational conflict is uprooting, eviction, displacement. To say, keep the geography as it is and change the rules of the game, change the way it's governed. And if it's governed that there is a Palestinian state, even though Jews are there, and there's an Israeli state, even though the Palestinians are there, right? It's not unusual that they have minorities. And they have a one, call it the State of Jerusalem, the Confederation of Jerusalem, the Abrahamic Confederation, all these names that common to Palestinians and Jews, that will have an entity like a Europe or like a Canada or the two peoples, or Belgium is another example I didn't talk about. So in fact, Belgium is very, very similar in a way because Brussels belongs to the two nations. It's the capital of the Flemish and the Walloons. So we think there should be the whole country declared, whatever name they choose it. The Israel-Palestine Confederation, the Jerusalem Confederation, what it is. There will be Israel as it is now, with its international border, which is the green line, and there will be Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza. There will be Palestinian sovereignty, Palestinian parliament, Palestinian rules, and the Jews that live in Palestine will be under Palestinian rule and Palestinian law. And the same with Palestinians that live in Israel. They will be under Israeli law. And Jerusalem will be joint capital, a bit like Brussels, for the two nations. And another important principle is freedom of movement. Where are we here? No forced uprooting. Gradual free movement, Schengen style. So we see what's worked in Europe. I mean, Europe was the, don't forget, graveyard of the world. 60 million people were killed in Europe in the first half of the 20th century. And since then, barely anybody, right? Part of the key for that was creating an economic union, which Israel-Palestine will be one economy. It's already one economy. We call it the shekel space. All the Palestinians, they call it in Gaza, they use the shekel. And the Bank of Israel decides on the monetary policy. So there will be one economic space and freedom of movement. Now, freedom of movement has to be gradual. And why do I say Schengen? Because it took Europe 40 years maybe to have total freedom of movement. Because you have to build confidence with the people. They feel threatened by people crossing unchecked. So it could be progressively, and there's a lot of interest of Palestinians to come and work and visit in Israel, but also there's a lot of interest, as you know, Jews to go to the West Bank. In fact, there's already 700,000 Jews in the West Bank. So there is mutual interest for freedom of movement, but it has to be dealt very carefully. And then no first uprooting, as we said. So the Jewish settlers will be accommodated in Palestine. Now we know that's very much, very, very sensitive because a lot of them are on stolen land and you actually sort of give a prize to criminals. But the condition under which the Palestinians wrote this policy is that they will pay for the land that they stole. They will get agreement and they will be approved, but planning-wise, by the Palestinian Authority. That will be under Palestinian sovereignty. Now we think that most Israelis would leave under such agreement. Maybe half of them would leave, like happens in most places. But those that remain will be secured in their own municipalities, schools that have the rights of a minority. And the same for Palestinians in Israel. Another issue is the right of return. Hak al-Auda. It's very, very sensitive. No Palestinian will say that they give up the Hak al-Auda, the right of return, which goes back to 1948. So under this, they actually have the right of return. They become Palestinian citizens, and then they have freedom of movement. They will not be Israeli citizens. That is, if they go and settle in Jaffa, they will not upset the politics of Israel because they will not, just like in Europe, they will not be part of the Israeli politics. They will still be part of the Palestinian political body. But it is a way of people to return if they want to. Most of them, according to surveys, don't want to, but they want to be recognized and to have that right to return. Jerusalem is open, autonomous, shared capital. That's also quite important. It doesn't belong to Israel or to the Palestinians. It will be its own municipality. The municipality will be like a city, strong city government, a bit like New York maybe. with its budget, with its police, and we developed a whole policy about that. By the way, we have brochures there, and if you scan the QR code, you can get all these details, in a better way. Joint institutions, one of the things that confederation tend to work, and they don't always work. Sometimes they fail. There's some examples that they fail. For example, Egypt and Syria tried to have a confederation, it failed. But when they work, they have strong joint institutions. And they usually start with things that are less sensitive, like environment, labor movements, currency, things that don't touch the heart. It's not about identity and education and culture. So this is quite important, the land management, trade, currency, immigration. And it's very important for us, as I said in my opening remarks, it's all according to international law. And this is very important. 145 countries in the world joined to the ICJ and the ICC, the thing that Trump is fighting with. But the vast majority of the world supports international law. The UN, 193 countries in the UN. This is very important for us that we go by international law. Many of the other proposals are against international law. And this is why actually they don't succeed quite often. And restitution and distribution also in terms of what we call transitional justice, where people were harmed by the conflict, whether Palestinian or Jews, they should have redress. They should have redress, monetary redress, or apologies, or some kind of process to heal the wounds. So this, we think, will be a model that can actually, it's outside the box. It actually offers the two nations their rights in a different way, not partition or not having tried to lock everybody into one polity. And we've had quite a long trip, as Stephen was saying, about 12 years now. This is a ruler in May. We went to the European Parliament last year. By the way, almost everybody we meet said it's a great idea, it's terrific, I wish you success, but then they do nothing about it. Right, so it's
the co-heads are Palestinian and Israeli.
Yeah. Just to round off, I put this, of course we have discussion, etc., but I put this clip by Mira Awad and Achinoam Nini. You know that? They made a very, very beautiful song for the Eurovision about 7 or 8 years ago. It's called There Must Be Another Way. Let's see if it works. Nada. I'll make it a bit louder.
Tax forms and tax situations. Make the switch to TurboTax Do It. Must be another way. Amen.
She's saying, my sister, in your eyes, I can see all that I wish for. And together we went through a very hard way, so much suffering. And our tears pour down in vain. And we have pain with no name. And we wait together for that day that will come. There must be another way. Everybody needs to live without fear. We don't hope. And the horizon for every person is, or every nation is freedom. I didn't get part of it, but it says something we can come back with a sort mushtarak, with a joint voice. Or very difficult way we had, and now we still have ahead of us difficult way, but we can see the light, El Or. When I cry for both of us. That's in English, right? Tears fall down in vain, and we have pain with no name. And the band was also Palestinian and Israelis in the band. It didn't bring peace, but it brings some inspiration, right? So anyhow, this is what we. Well, the Eurovision, I think they came 5th or 4th, which is not bad, out of 40 countries. But still Europe didn't do anything politically, and nor did the United States. So we're still stuck, and we're in a worse situation now. But on this, we rest our case. So there must be another way. And if you want to discuss, to ask, I'm here for that.
We have some time for a Q&A discussion. I'll start with two, trying to